Girl Squad, it's time for Little Men. If you all are doing well today, go away, bookmark. I need you to go away now. Oh well. One listener he had who never tired and to whom he was more than a mere schoolmate. Poor Billy's chief delight was to lie beside the brook, watching leaves and bits of foam dance by, listening dreamily to the music in the willow tree. He seemed to think Nat a sort of angel who sat aloft and sang. For a few baby memories still lingered in his mind and seemed to grow brighter at these times. Seeing the interest he took in Nat, Mr. Bear begged him to help him lift the cloud from the feeble brain by this gentle spell, glad to do anything to show his gratitude. Nat always smiled on Billy when he followed him about, and let him listen undisturbed to the music which seemed to speak a language he could understand. Help one another was a favorite Plumfield motto, and Nat learned how much sweetness is added to life by trying to live up to it. Jack Ford's peculiar pastime was buying and selling, and he bid fair to follow in the footsteps of his uncle, a country merchant, who sold a little of everything and made money fast. Jack had seen the sugar sanded, the molasses watered, the butter mixed with lard, and things of that kind, and labored under the delusion that it was all a proper part of business. His stock in trade was of a different sort, but he made as much as he could out of every worm he sold, and always got the best of the bargain when he traded with the boys for string, knives, fish hooks, or whatever the article might be. The boys, who all had nicknames, called him Skinflint, but Jack did not care as long as the old tobacco pouch in which he kept his money grew heavier and heavier. Hang on just a second. Okay. Grew heavier and heavier. He established a sort of auction room and now and then sold off all the odds and ends he had collected or helped the lads exchange things with one another. He got bats, balls, hockey sticks, etc., cheap from one set of mates, furbished them up, and let them for a few cents a time to another set, and let them go, maybe. Often extending his business beyond the gates of Plumfield in spite of the rules, Mr. Bear put a stop to some of his speculation and tried to give him a better idea of business talent than mere sharpness in overreaching his neighbors. Now and then Jack made a bad bargain and felt worse about it than any other failure in lessons or conduct, and took his revenge on the next innocent customer who came along. His account book was a curiosity, and his quickness at figures quite remarkable. Mr. Bear praised him for this, and tried to make his sense of honesty and honor as quick. And by, when Jack found he could not get on without these virtues, he owned that his teacher was right. Cricket and football the boys had, of course, but after the stirring accounts of these games in the immortal Tom Brown at Rugby, no feeble female pen may venture to do more than respectfully allude to them. Emil spent his holidays on the river or the pond and drilled the elder lads for a race with certain town boys who now and then invaded their territory. The race duly came off, but as it ended in a general shipwreck, it was not mentioned in public, and the Commodore had serious thoughts of retiring to a desert island, so disgusted was he with his kind for a time. No desert island being convenient, he was forced to remain among his friends and found consolation in building a boathouse. The little girls indulged in the usual plays of their age, improving upon them somewhat as their lively fancies suggested. The chief and most absorbing play was called Mrs. Shakespeare Smith. The name was provided by Aunt Jo, but the trials of the poor lady were quite original. Daisy was Mrs. SS, and Nan, by turns, her daughter or neighbor, Mrs. Giddy Gaddy. No pen can describe the adventures of these ladies, for in one short afternoon their family was the scene of births, marriages, deaths, floods, earthquakes, tea parties, and balloon ascensions. Millions of miles did these energetic women travel, dressed in hats and habits never seen before by mortal eye, perched on the bed, driving the posts like mettlesome steeds, and bouncing up and down till their heads spun. Fits and fires were the pet afflictions, with the general massacre now and then. And by way of change, Nan was never tired of inventing fresh combinations, and Daisy followed her leader with blind admiration. Poor Teddy was a frequent victim and was often rescued from real danger, for the excited ladies were apt to forget that he was not of the same stuff of their long-suffering dolls. Once he was shut into the closet for a dungeon and forgotten by the girls, who ran off to some out-of-door game. Another time he was half drowned in the bathtub playing Be a Cunning Little Whale, and worst of all, he was cut down just in time after being hung up for a robber. Oh my God. But the institution most patronized by all was the club. It had no other name, and it needed none, being the only one in the neighborhood. The elder lads got it up, and if the younger were occasionally admitted if they behaved well. Tommy and Demi were honorary members, but were always obliged to retire unpleasantly early, owing to circumstances over which they had no control. The proceedings of this club were somewhat peculiar, for it met at all sorts of places and hours, had all manner of queer ceremonies and amusements, and now and then was broken up tempestuously, only to be reestablished, however, on a firmer basis. Rainy evenings the members met in the schoolroom and passed the time in games, chess, morris, backgammon, fencing matches, recitations, debates, or dramatic performances of a darkly tragical nature. In summer, the barn was the rendezvous, and what went on there, no uninitiated mortal knows. On sultry evenings, the club adjourned to the brook for aquatic exercises, and the members set about in airy attire, frog-like and cool. On such occasions, the speeches were unusually eloquent, quite flowing, as one might say, and if any orator's remarks displeased the audience, cold water was thrown upon him till his ardor was effectually quenched. Franz was president and maintained order admirably, considering the unruly nature of the members. Mr. Bear never interfered with their affairs, and was rewarded for this wise forbearance by being invited now and then to behold the mysteries unveiled, which he appeared to enjoy much. When Nan came, she wished to join the club, and caused great excitement and division among the gentlemen by presenting endless petitions, both written and spoken, disturbing their solemnities by insulting them through the keyhole, performing vigorous solos on the door, and writing up derisive remarks on walls and fences, for she belonged to the irrepressibles. Finding these appeals in vain, the girls, by the advice of Mrs. Jo, got up an institution of their own, which they called the Cozy Club. To this they magnanimously invited the gentlemen whose youth excluded them from the other one, and entertained these favored beings so well with little suppers, new games devised by Nan, and other pleasing festivities, that one by one the elder boys confessed a desire to partake of these more elegant enjoyments, and after much consultation finally decided to propose an interchange of civilities. The members of the Cozy Club were invited to adorn the rival establishment on certain evenings, and to the surprise of the gentlemen, their presence was not found to be a restraint upon the conversation or amusement of the regular frequenters, which could not be said of all clubs, I fancy. The ladies responded handsomely and hospitably to these overtures of peace, and both institutions flourished long and happily. And that is the end of chapter 8. In chapter 9, only been on 11 minutes. We'll start this. It's called Daisy's Ball. Mrs. Shakespeare Smith would like to have one Mr. John Brooke, Mr. Thomas Bangs, and Mr. Nathaniel Blake to come to her ball at 3 o'clock today. P.S. Nat must bring his fiddle so we can dance, and all the boys must be good or they cannot have any of the nice things we have cooked. This elegant invitation would, I fear, have been declined but for the hint given in the last line of the postscript. They have been cooking lots of goodies. I smelt them. Let's go, said Tommy. We needn't stay after the feast, you know, added Demi. I never went to a ball. What do you have to do? Asked Nat. Oh, we just play be men and sit around stiff and stupid like grown-up folks, and dance to please the girls, and we eat up everything and come away as soon as we can. I think I could do that, said Nat after considering Tommy's description for a minute. I'll write and say we'll come, said Demi, dispatched the following gentlemanly reply. We will all come. Please have lots to eat. J.B. Esquire. Great was the anxiety of the ladies about their first ball because if everything went well, they intended to give a dinner party to the chosen few. Aunt Jo likes to have the boys play with us if they're not rough, so we must make them like our balls, then they will do them good, said Daisy, with her maternal air as she set the table and surveyed the store of refreshments with an anxious eye. Demi and Nat will be good, but Tommy will do something bad. I know he will, replied Nan, shaking her head over the little cake basket which she was arranging. Then I shall send him right home, said Daisy with decision. People don't do so at parties. It isn't proper. I shall never ask him any more. That would do. He'd be sorry not to come to the dinner ball, wouldn't he? I guess he would. We'll have the splendidest things ever, see? Try this again. I guess he would. We'll have the splendidest things ever seen, won't we? Real soup with a ladle and a tureen, she meant tureen, and a little bird for turkey, and gravy, and all kinds of nice vegetables. Daisy never could say vegetables properly and had given up trying. It is most 3, and we ought to dress, said Nan, who arranged a fine costume for the occasion and was anxious to wear it. I'm the mother, so I shan't dress up much, said Daisy, putting on a nightcap ornamented with a red bow, one of her aunt's long skirts and a shawl, a pair of spectacles, and large pocket handkerchief completed her toilette, making a plump, rosy little matron of her. Nan had a wreath of artificial flowers, a pair of old pink slippers, a yellow scarf, a green muslin skirt, and a fan made of feathers from the duster. Also, as a last touch of elegance, a smelling bottle without any smell in it. I'm the daughter, so I rig up a good deal, and I must sing and dance and talk more than you do. The mothers only get the tea and be proper, you know. A sudden, very loud knock caused Miss Smith to fly into a chair and fan herself violently, while her mamma sat bolt upright on the sofa and tried to look quite calm and proper. Little Bess, who was on a visit, acted the part of a maid and opened the door, saying with a smile, "Wart in, oh gosh, I can't hardly say it. Gentlemen, it's all ready. It's all ready. Wart in." This is Wart. Wart in. Whatever. In honor of the occasion, the boys wore high paper collars, tall black hats, and gloves of every color and material, for they were an afterthought. Not a boy among them had a perfect pair. "Good day, Mum," said Demi in a deep voice which was so hard to keep up that his remarks had to be extremely brief. Everyone shook hands and then sat down, looking so funny, yet so sober that the gentlemen forgot their manners and rolled in their chairs with laughter. "Oh, don't," cried Mrs. Smith, much distressed. "You can't ever come again if you act so," added Miss Smith, rapping Mr. Bangs with her bottle because he laughed loudest. "I can't help it. You look so like fury," gasped Mr. Bangs, with most uncourteous candor. "So do you, but I shouldn't be so rude as to say so. He shan't come to the dinner ball, shall he, Daisy?" cried Nan indignantly. "I think we'd better dance now. Did you bring your fiddle, sir?" asked Mrs. Smith, trying to preserve her polite composure. "It's outside the door," and Nat went to get it. "Better have tea first," proposed the unabashed Tommy, winking openly at Demi to remind him that the sooner the refreshments were secure, the sooner they could escape. "No, we never have supper first, and if you don't dance well, you won't have any supper at all. No, not one bit, sir," said Mrs. Smith so sternly that her wild guest saw she was not to be trifled with, and grew overwhelmingly civil all at once. "I will take Mr. Bangs and teach him the polka, for he does not know it fit to be seen," added the hostess with a reproachful look that sobered Tommy at once. "Oh man, let me get something to drink right quick. Still taking my drying up sinus pills. Which works. Dries up everything in mouth. Nat struck up, and the ball opened with two couples who went conscientiously through a somewhat varied dance. The ladies did well because they liked it, but the gentlemen exerted themselves from more selfish motives, for each felt he must earn his supper and labored manfully toward that end. When everyone was out of breath, they were allowed to rest, and indeed poor Mrs. Smith needed it, for her long dress had tripped her up many times. The little maid passed round molasses and water in such small cups that one guest actually emptied 9. I refrained from mentioning his name, because this mild beverage affected him so much he put the cup and all into his mouth at the 9th round and choked himself publicly. So they're making something like liquor, I reckon. "You must ask Nan to play and sing now," said Daisy to her brother, who sat looking very much like an owl as he gravely regarded the festive scene between his high collars. "Give us a song, Mum," said the obedient guest, secretly wondering where the piano was. Miss Smith sailed up to an old secretary which stood in the room, and threw back the lid of the writing desk, and sitting down before it, accompanied herself with a vigor which made the old desk rattle as she sang the new and lovely song, beginning. So she's pretending that the secretary, roll-top desk, I guess, was the piano. And she's singing now, but I can't do that. "Gaily the troubadour touched his guitar as he was hastening home from the war." "The gentlemen applauded so enthusiastically that she gave them Bounding Billows, Little Bo Peep, and other gems of songs, till they were obliged to hint that they had had enough. Grateful for the praises bestowed upon her daughter, Mrs. Smith graciously announced, 'Now we will go have tea.' And that's the evening meal. I just found that out from, I don't know if it was Tracy or who said it. Somewhere I heard that. I always thought tea was like a little afternoon break, snack, whatever. It was beautiful to see the air of pride with which the good lady did the honors of her table, and the calmness with which she bore the little mishaps that occurred. The best pie flew wildly on the floor when she tried to cut it with a very dull knife. The bread and butter vanished with rapidity calculated to dismay a housekeeper's soul. And worst of all, the custards were so soft that they had to be drunk up instead of being eaten elegantly with the new tin spoons. I grieve to state that Miss Smith squabbled with the maid for the best jumble, which caused Bess to toss the whole dish into the air, burst out crying amid a rain of falling cakes. She was comforted by a seat at table and the sugar bowl to empty, but during this flurry a large plate of patties was mysteriously lost and could not be found. They were the chief ornament of the feast, and Mrs. Smith was indignant at their loss, for she had made them herself, and they were beautiful to behold. I put it to any lady, if it was not hard to have one dozen delicious patties made of flour, salt, and water, and a large raisin in the middle of each, and much sugar over the whole, swept away at one fell swoop. "You hid them, Tommy, I know you did," cried the outraged hostess, threatening her suspect guest with the milk pot. "I didn't." "You did." "It isn't proper to contradict," said Nan, who was hastily eating up the jelly during the fray. "Give them back, Demi," said Tommy. "That's a fib. You got them in your own pocket," bawled Demi, roused by the false accusation. "Let's take it away from him. It's too bad to make Daisy cry," suggested Nat, who found his first ball more exciting than he expected. Daisy was already weeping. Bess, like a devoted servant, mingled her tears with those of her mistress, and Nan denounced the entire race of boys as plaguey things. Meanwhile, the battle raged among the gentlemen, for when the two defenders of innocence fell upon the foe, that hardened youth entrenched himself behind a table and pelted them with the stolen tarts. Which were very effective missiles, being nearly as hard as bullets. While his ammunition held out, the besieged prospered, but the moment the last patty flew over the parapet, the villain was seized, dragged howling from the room, and cast upon the hall floor in an ignominious heap. The conquerors then returned flushed with victory, and while Demi consoled poor Mrs. Smith, Nat and Nan collected the scattered tarts, replaced each raisin in its proper bed, and rearranged the dish so that it looked almost as well as ever. But their glory had departed, for the sugar was gone, and no one cared to eat them after the insult offered to them. "I guess we'd better go," said Demi suddenly, as Aunt Joe's voice was heard on the stairs. "Perhaps we had," said Nat, hastily dropped a stray jumble that he had just picked up. But Mrs. Joe was among them before the retreat was accomplished, and into her sympathetic ear the young ladies poured the story of their woes. "No more balls for these boys till they have atoned for this bad behavior by doing something kind to you," said Mrs. Joe, shaking her head at the three culprits. "We were only in fun," began Demi. "I don't like fun that makes other people unhappy. I'm disappointed in you, Demi, for I hoped you would never learn to tease Daisy, such a kind little sister she is to you." "Boys always tease their sisters. Tom says so," muttered Demi. "I don't intend that my boys shall, and I must send in Daisy home if you cannot play happily together," said Aunt Joe soberly. At this awful threat, Demi sidled up to his sister, and Daisy hastily dried her tears, for to be separated was the worst misfortune that could happen to the twins. "Nat was bad too, and Tommy was baddest of all," observed Nan, fearing that two of the sinners would not get their fair share of punishment. "I'm sorry," said Nat, much ashamed. "I ain't," bawled Tommy through the keyhole where he was listening with all his might. Mrs. Joe wanted very much to laugh, but kept her countenance, and said impressively as she pointed to the door, "You can go, boys, but remember you are not to speak to or play with the little girls till I give you leave. You don't deserve the pleasure, so I forbid it." The ill-mannered young gentleman hastily retired to be received outside with derision and scorn by the unrepentant Bangs, who would not associate with them for at least 15 minutes. Daisy was soon consoled for the failure of the ball, but lamented the edict that parted her from her brother, and mourned over his shortcomings in her tender little heart. Nan rather enjoyed the trouble, and went about turning up her pug nose at the three, especially Tommy, who pretended not to care, and loudly proclaimed his satisfaction at being rid of those stupid girls. But in his secret soul he soon repented of the rash act that caused this banishment from the society he loved, and every hour of separation taught him the value of the stupid girls. The others gave in very soon, and longed to be friends, for now there was no Daisy to pet and cook for them, no Nan to amuse and doctor them, and worst of all, no Mrs. Joe to make home life pleasant and life easy for them. To their great affliction, Mrs. Joe seemed to consider herself one of the offended girls, for she hardly spoke to the outcast, looked as if she did not see them when she passed, and was always too busy now to attend to their requests. This sudden and entire exile from favor cast a gloom over their souls, for when Mother Bear deserted them, their sun had set at noonday, as it were, and they had no refuge left. Let me mark this place. Let's see how much more we got. Yeah, it goes on and on for a bit, so I think we will stop there. That was pretty good though, wasn't it? I got some chuckles. Sure did. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, I hope you all have a great Sunday and hope to see you live at 3. GrannyDee at 3. All right. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. See you soon. Bye-bye.